Brent Murdoch. I'm the Director and General Manager of Vista Gold Australia.
Thank you.
We're a company developing a large gold mine 50 kilometres north of Katherine, looking to kick off in the next sort of 12 to 18 months. We're pleased to provide a response to your interim document. It's not our intention to express an opinion on the merits or otherwise of hydraulic fracturing. However, Vista is concerned that the inquiry's terms of reference do not consider the impact of its recommendations on non-associated industries like metalliferous mining. As stated in the inquiry's interim report, one of the purposes of the inquiry is to assess and determine, on a third point, whether the existing regulatory framework is sufficient to implement these methodologies, and if not, what changes need to be made. A case in point, as recently as 2016, changes were made to legislation requiring gas exploration companies to have formal access agreements with other land tenure holders. This was done with consultation with government, gas exploration companies and landholders. At the last minute, this requirement was extended to mining companies with zero consultation to the mining sector. In each of the areas already identified by the inquiry, there is obvious overlapping issues with water, land access, air emissions, public health, Aboriginal people and culture, social impacts, economic impacts, and of course, regulatory reform. Our first recommendation is that no changes to regulations be extended to cover other non-fracking related activities without due process, specifically consultation with all stakeholders. The second point, and there's only two in my submission, so it will be brief. There's a lot of confusion in the community, in both the community and with our senior government officials, around what industry undertakes hydraulic fracking. The oil and gas industry, not the mining industry, carries out these activities. As recently as last Sunday, the Federal Minister, Nigel Scullion, made the following statement. The mining industry still had some work to be done before hydraulic fracking was accepted by the community. The second recommendation I'd like to make is that care should be taken to ensure that the oil and gas industry remains differentiated from other industries like metalliferous mining. Thank you for the opportunity to raise the issues and look forward to a positive impact the inquiry's recommendations will have with all its stakeholders. And I think, the document, the interim report so far, the vibe of that is very useful in other industries. I'm not suggesting that the mining industry is not going to leverage off this good body of work. However, I think specifically regulatory reform needs to involve a much wider audience than just the oil and gas industry. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Murdoch. We didn't have any hand in the terms of reference. We didn't. They came to us fully formed, and we are, to put it bluntly, stuck with them. So I accept that they don't capture associated extractive industries like mining. I also accept that it may well be that some of the reforms that we are likely to propose, regulatory reforms, may have an impact on extractive industries, but we are, and we must, by our terms of reference, only look at unconventional onshore shale gas. That is all that we are entitled to do under our terms of reference. But I do think the point you make about its wider, potential wider implications is a good one, but we're stuck with those. Thank you.
Understand.
Any questions? Yes, Dr. Beck.
I appreciate your concerns about that flow-on effect, but I'm wondering if you could just perhaps elaborate for us in terms of the potential benefits and disadvantages of having if there were to be a gas industry sitting alongside an extractive industry like yourselves. So.
Oh, there'd be massive benefits. There's no question. I mean, having a larger critical mass, having a larger economy in the Northern Territory, improving the capability, the local capability, has a massive benefit, both social and economic. That I'm sure my project would greatly benefit from, and vice versa. I also think the changes in environmental regulation we would also benefit from in the mining industry. I think the void that's there at the moment with trust in the regulators will be addressed, and is current. This is part of that being addressed, and that'll have significant benefits to the mining industry. So I do think we're certainly heading in the right direction. I just petition the panel that there's other industries that it affects, and not having the consultation like we had last year with access issues can be very detrimental and have unwanted outcomes, or at least not achieve the benefits that could.
I appreciate that those observations, and you note that there can be substantial economic and social benefits for the territory. What about the competition for resources between, say, gas and the extractive industries in terms of personnel, equipment, and so forth? Do you see potential problems in that?
Absolutely, there'll be conflict. It'll be hard to get a local baker, because they may be out in the doing gas exploration, or they may be out on a gold mine. So there's certainly there'll be conflicts in the market on demand and supply. And it's our I guess from lessons learned in the past, it's our responsibility as developers to address that ahead of the time. I take your point. There's always a lag, and it does cause conflict.
And as responsible developers, how do you try to address that in advance?
Preparing a workforce, developing a workforce, or identifying the skill shortage, and making or creating activities that addresses that. I mean, on our project alone, we expect 2,300 people to come to Katherine, Pine Creek area with a nominal population of 10,000. That's a significant change, and making sure that there's housing, making sure that there is public services available for that change is something that we've been addressing over the last almost decade with the Northern Territory government and others.
That's a substantial increase in population to the Katherine area. So
very much so.
Yes. So can you just outline some of the issues you've been discussing with the Territory government, and what some of the potential resolution of those issues might be in the future?
So we spent a lot of time with the local council, the mayor, and identifying potential issues, and then take those issues to Darwin, to the Minister's office or departments. So lands and planning we spend a lot of time with lands and planning. We have, there's land that's being earmarked if the demand is real, that would be released, and one of those stages has already been released. So that's one example of how we prepare for this massive change that development will bring. But hopefully it's positive. There's more positive.
Yeah. We see in examples within the gas industry where they have sometimes formed camps which are then used for the high-intensity construction phase. How do you see your mine progressing in that regard? Do you see some local camps, or from what you're saying there, I think you're saying you see it happening perhaps within the township of Katherine?
Absolutely. So we have a novel approach. It's in as much as we will incentivise our staff. So for every employee that comes to work for us, we will provide them with a equivalent of a deposit for a house, and they will be expected to go into the community and purchase a house and become part of the community. And after 3 years, that will be written off. So it's quite a new model. It's a different model. We spent time, like I say, with a lot of people in Katherine discussing what they wanted and what was likely to work. It fits two purposes for us. It obviously, it's a way of providing housing for our workforce, but also it's our hope that it also stems a lot of the turnover and a lot of the issues associated with boom and bust type operations, and provides a more stable workforce and a more long-term benefit for the community.
So you can
say a large part, 20% of our workforce, we actually believe is currently in Katherine doing fly in, fly out. They're actually leaving Katherine to work and coming back. So the opposite that we hear of with the issues of fly in, fly out and taking money away. The moment Katherine actually gets the benefit, if you will, of that occurring. So a lot of those people, I would imagine, would prefer, to be home every night and doing the same sort of work. So,
That's very interesting. Can I just ask one, I think, final question?
Yes.
I've been given permission. We've been alerted quite regularly about this boom and bust cycle. So within the gold mining area, I suspect that you've got a peak in in the construction phase. So if you've got people coming in, you're providing deposits, there's a big building boom in Katherine. What happens at the end of your construction phase when you drop down to presumably a lower number?
sorry, I should have been clear. So I'm talking about the operating phase of the project. The construction phase of the project, we will establish a camp out on the mine site,
right.
And that will be wound down and mothballed as we go into production, because it's literally not sustainable to have to come towards the end of your construction phase where you've got a construction workforce and an operating workforce at the same time trying to be accommodated in a township the size of Katherine. And also the comment we got from a lot of public meetings was they didn't want construction people in town upsetting the feng shui, if that's a nice way to put it, for a very short period of time. They expressed a wish that be a more controlled environment.
Thank you very much.
Dr. Ritchie.
Thank you. I just want to clarify that talking to the Department of Lands, was that about serviced industrial land?
No, it's residential.
Residential. Okay,
Yes.
That's interesting. Right.
Yeah. We also attach our support to KMSA and their bids for a industrial precinct.
Yep.
We think that would have great benefits for us as a project. But the lands and planning that I referred to is solely for
this residential. Okay.
Housing. We're very concerned that would upset the demand and supply so much that the housing prices would go to a point where your children couldn't afford to buy a house and would have to leave and work elsewhere. I mean, this is a project.
A bit like Sydney or Melbourne.
Yeah, like the city of Melbourne or Sydney. Yeah, absolutely.
Are you able to provide this is really interesting, and I mean, we've heard a sort of a number of different ways to incentivize people to stay. Some people have suggested 6-day weeks, or even though you might have 2 on, 1 off, or whatever that period may be, insisting that there's a 6-day week to try and again encourage people to be in town, spend money there, buy in the local community. But this is quite innovative. Are you able to provide any further information to the inquiry as to what other types of incentives or mechanisms that you're going to try and implement to try and, as I said, avoid that boom bust and avoid the negative social impacts on Katherine of the Mine?
Yeah, I mean, there's a raft of different initiatives. So one of the primary ones, and particularly working in an area like Katherine, is to involve the local Jawoyn people. So we're on freehold Jawoyn lands where we're developing the project. So we're very fortunate to have a long-term relationship. We've been able to provide that support where they get continuing building amount of benefits throughout the project. So, and not just providing services like buses or cleaning, but more long-term or businesses that require a much higher level of expertise in providing that support. It's been my experience that if you just put out a tender and it's awarded, it tends to fall over. But we're very, very poor in Australia in maintaining our contracts. Most other countries will manage their contracts or maintain their contracts on at least a 6-monthly, if not more regular basis. Whereas Australia was that, well, that's it, that's the price, and you provide the service. Where it's our we've identified that doesn't give a good outcome. So it's another area that we're already working with the Jawoyn, looking at their long-term strategic plan and how they are going to engage with the mine on both a business and also on a cultural level.
Can you give me, if you can, maybe give reasons why you can't, a concrete example of the type of thing you're envisaging?
No.
Okay.
I wish I could. Sorry.
No, fair enough.
Judge, no.
No.
I mean, these are discussions.
Yeah, I thought I'd ask the question.
I would make the point, one of the things we have found in dealing with like the Jawoyn Aboriginal Corporation is that it changes regularly. So there's periods in time where it's very easy to work with or to advance particular initiatives, and then there's other times when it's more difficult, and picking those times is important. It's difficult. It's difficult for.
Is that because you've just got people sort of different? You're having to deal with different people. Is that?
Absolutely, you're dealing with different people at the time. They've got issues, or they've got a lot of things going on that I don't guess or presume to understand. But it's something that we're certainly mindful of and certainly cognizant of.
Thank you. Thank you.
Can I just clarify?
One.
You mentioned 2,300 people. Is
Yes.
that during the production phase, not?
That's during production phase, so that's a multiplier. So there's 450 people on the mine,
Right.
and the work that GHD done for us back in 2013 indicated that would generally transpose to 2,300 people, including more teachers and police and bakers and etc.
Thank you very much for that.
Yes, Dr. Anderson, and then Professor Priestley. Yes, Dr. Anderson.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Murdoch. I've got a question about the concern you raised about the possibility of regulations recommended for the gas industry sort of spilling over to the mining industry. It wouldn't be a good outcome from your perspective. And you gave the example of land access.
Yes.
But you've talked a lot about your relationship with Jarwin, and it seems to have been a successful one, despite some
Absolutely.
of these issues. Can you elaborate then? What's your concern then about?
I use that
land
as
access?
an example to try and provide some support to my point. We're actually on freehold Aboriginal land, so we're not subject to native title, and in fact are not required to have a formal land access agreement. But we also sit on the board of the Minerals Council in the Northern Territory, and we were very surprised to have that change in our regulations. It was at the last minute. It was oil and gas, and then the legislation came out, and mining. It was,
Yeah.
and I have a concern that will happen in a lot of these other areas where a lot of work will be done under the auspice of hydraulic fracking and requirements to make a more robust environmental regime, and that will just literally have and mining put on it and be extended to cover mines without having the consultation with our industry. I mean, and I actually believe that most of 80% of the changes won't require any sort of adapting, but some will. Recycling of water would be a classic on a mine site. I mean, we recycle hundreds of millions of litres of water a day on a single mine site. It's part of our normal activity, up to tailings, and we recover that water and use it again. It's certainly one of the fears brought out in the interim report from the community that the recycling of water has certain risks. I would be concerned that any changes that were made didn't have a consultation or some consideration of what we've been doing for a couple of 100 years in the mining industry, and a very old industry.
Thank you. Yeah, yes, Professor Priestley.
That sort of leads into the question I wanted to ask, in that the thing that's been consistently raised with us in community consultations about the development of the shale gas industry are the environmental impacts.
Yes.
I wonder if you could relate the experience you've had in engaging with the community about the potential environmental impacts of your mining venture.
In my experience, and I had an arduous experience back from 2012 through to 2015, where we had no social licence, and the Mount Todd mine was seen as a very bad project and something that shouldn't be supported, to where we are today, where it's completely opposite. My lesson learnt out of that, or a take home out of that over those three years, was that when the facts were put out and available for everybody to see, when the data was available to everyone to see, and it provided assistance in how to interpret those, that one by one all of the fears were deemed not to be real, or the perceptions changed, and by going through that process we won the trust of the community, and that trust is ours to lose. One mistake and unfortunately I'll have to pick up my family and move state. It's that sort of place in the Northern Territory, so the stakes are high, but we were the first project to publish all of our environmental data on our website. So every single water assay, every single macroinvertebrate study, all of our data that we have, bar none, including our calculation, or the values that we've calculated for our environmental bond for each year of the operating project, are available on our website. And that was a conscious decision that we made, knowing full well that times are going to change, and that's most likely going to be a requirement in any case. So we put it out there, and we've never had any negative effect of doing that. So in fact, the opposite.
No, it's certainly the lack of lack of available data, transparency in that data has been something that has been raised by members of the public and community time and time again. You know, we don't know.
Yes, I think, and from an industry perspective, it's how's that data going to be interpreted by non-experts?
Sure,
And
sure.
In our experience, if they have questions, they'll come and ask, and you can provide somebody with that expertise if you can't do it yourself.
Thank you. Anything else? No. Again, thank you very much for coming today, Mr. Murdoch. That's been very enlightening, actually, for a whole range of reasons. As I said, I'm perhaps don't regret, but this is not a mining inquiry. Perhaps quite relieved that this is not a mining inquiry. But I do appreciate what you've said about the flow-on impacts of us making regulations. I'm not sure that we can do anything about this within the context of this inquiry, and as I said, we are stuck with those terms of reference, but I'm sure that those who are listening, I hope, have noted what you've said. But thank you very much. That's been most useful.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.